one on the left. Can you tell what it is? It's a YD100. It's Tweaker's motor. That is directly off Tweaker, still runs. The drive sprocket cracked. But we have another cylinder up here that I really want to put back on there because I tried it once. And that's where the rattling's coming from. Hopefully you guys can see that. I'm not sure if I'm pointing. And then it was a whole problem with the crank, and I didn't realize that, and I thought it was a problem with my port work, and it wasn't. So I really want to put that back on and just try it out for fun. I want to have a good backup bike. Jokester's running great, but I like to have a backup bike. So I really need to get Tweaker 100% trustworthy for me to ride around in case I need to suddenly, and the YD100 is a perfect match for that. All right, welcome back to the channel, and thank you for tuning in to Johnny's Motorized Bicycles. As always, hit the like button for me because I need to pass this channel around to more people to be a bigger audience so I can make more money. No, but for real, hit the like button. If you do like it, don't lie. I don't really like liars. If you're lying, I'll know. I won't know. I have no idea. Lie and hit the like button for me because I'd appreciate it. Because it makes me feel happy and so special. Also, if you could, please subscribe. I'd appreciate that a lot if you would subscribe. Whatever. I'm tired of saying it. Not really. I'll say it every single video. Do me a favor, though. Drop me a line down in the comment section. As always, I like that and appreciate that probably more than anything. So, all that being said, what are we doing today? Well, we're doing the same thing we do every single time we're on here. And I can get even closer if you don't want me to. I don't care. So we're working on my YD100. Why are we working on my YD100? That is a good question. Allow me to show you. So this was on Tweaker when it broke. Surprise, surprise, Benny was riding it. And for once, this actually is not his fault. You know, the motor breaking was not his fault. Everything else getting broken, bike into pieces, the front end had to get rebuilt. That was his fault. And I know you're watching this, Benny. Yeah, it was your fault. But on the plus side, it looks really, really nice now. You guys have seen that. It looks super money. Okay, so anyway, he crashed a bike because the wheel locked up on him, and you know, that's what made him fall. So what happened is I thought maybe the motor blew up or something because I had no idea. The motor was spinning over freely. You didn't have to let the clutch in or out for it to do anything. And then on occasions it would just jam. So obviously I went immediately to the drive side when I came home. Well, actually not immediately when I came home. I let it sit for a while because I was steaming mad because, you know, it's Tweaker. Let's face facts. Tweaker's my baby. Even though it's a hoopty, it's still my baby. I went to the drive side and I found the issue. So I'm just gonna put this out there. So I could literally have this running tonight in the next few minutes with one simple piece. It's super easy to get to, super easy to fix. Like it's really not, it's not a lot of work at all. So you saw I have the spur gear off, it broke. The reason that the motor freezing up and stuff is not his fault. This had hairline fracture in it. You know, nothing that I could see, he could see. Well, he wouldn't see it because he never checks anything out. But like when I have the motor apart or something up, I can't. You're not going to notice a hairline crack unless you clean it and then magnaflux it to, you know, see where the cracks are and whatnot and all that. So as you can see, I have one in my hand. This is the one off of the motor. This is the one that's going on the motor, and boom, motor is fixed. Okay, it's fixed. But then all of a sudden, get over here. That's right. I saw a rabbit. And I'm chasing him down that hole. I can't help it, man. I cannot help it. I see a freaking rabbit and I'm going head first over to it. I'm getting that rabbit. So you already know what's going to happen. We are stripping this motor apart. The motor... This motor runs, it starts up every single time, runs flawlessly, never had a problem. The only problem I've had with this motor is a coil, which is not the motor's issue. Everything else has been absolutely flawless. You guys know it is my main mode of transportation. I ride them everywhere and for farthest. This is the motor that went all the way to Elizabeth. What is it? That's the crank. Listen to the run out. Can you hear that? All right, well, I need to make a spacer before when I put it back together. But that's, never mind. Well, let's get into that later. So basically, this thing ran perfectly and flawless, and I think it could make more power. No, in fact, I know it could make more power. I've always been really mild with my daily motors. Any motor that's a daily, I don't build it for high crazy power. I build it for higher RPM, and I want takeoff speed. But I don't go, I could, like Brian's motor, I was a monster onto the line, and I screwed that up, I guess, in a way. Like I built what he wanted. Let's be serious. I built exactly what he wanted. But knowing what I know, you can't make that much power on something you're going to ride 60 minutes, an hour long, every day, multiple times a day. You cannot make that kind of power. It's just not feasible for reliability reasons. If you were to upgrade the crank bearings, connecting rod bearings, all the bearings and stuff inside, yes, you could start to make that kind of power. Then your weak link is probably going to be the case and stuff. That's why guys go to the billet cases with the bigger recesses for the bearings and stuff. And that's why everyone upgrades. If they're making crazy power, they get the CNC cases because it just holds more power. When you're doing all stock, you can get away with a lot of power, but at small intervals to let everything cool down and stuff. Because once you start going and it expands, everything gets a little weaker because it's already expanded from the heat, and then you're putting that same amount of force that you started with when it was cool and tight. Now everything's, the molecules are spread apart and they're really going, and then bang. And that's what happens. So I'm going to do exactly that. I am going to put a cylinder head that I have up here that I was mucking around with it a long while ago, and I took it off because I thought there was a problem with the actual cylinder and my port work, even though it ran great when I had it on for the 2 times around the road. I literally, where I test ride up and down my street, literally twice up and down the street. And I took it off because I was having all kinds of crazy issues with the piston hitting the head and whatnot. But what I didn't realize is I made a lot of power in that motor because it was when I first started doing, or it was in the midway between me starting to do stuff and me now knowing what I'm doing. It was when I was figuring stuff out and kind of learning my limits. I just went for the gusto, made a lot of power. The thing's a little powerhouse, but it ended up blowing the crank bearing out. So is that going to happen to this? Probably, because this got a lot of miles on it, but let's hope for the best. But we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to have fun doing it. So without further ado, let's rip this completely apart, chase that rabbit right down the hole. I'm going to take a little carrot and dangle it in front of him and get him out of that hole, and then put it on the bike and see what that rabbit runs. Because I'm pretty positive that rabbit is going to really rip. Okay, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this or not, but I'm going to try. You could definitely hear it. Look how much slop. That might not look like a lot, but I would bet that's at least 3,000s. I mean, there's not supposed to be any play. No matter what, I think it's safe to say this motor needed to be freshened up. All right, guys, I don't know if you could see in there. I took the cylinder off, obviously. Look at the scoring in the cylinder. But look at this side is the intake side. Look down there. Look at the cylinder top. This thing burned clean. It really did run nice. It was tuned up good, running great. It was a great running motor. But I knew it was down on power quite a bit. Like after the ride to Elizabeth, I could tell that we just weren't pulling the same after that. That was a really hard day for this bike and motor. I pulled a lot of weight for a long time. I mean, it did it. And that was one of the last trips it took. I still ran the bike a little bit after that, but shortly after that, I had Jokester. The reason I got the welder is so I could do the handlebars on Jokester. So it just shows you how much I really did with this and how far I pushed it. But you could see the scoring all the way around. There is nothing but scoring. So to be honest with you, if I was to just put a new spur gear on it, it really wouldn't have been a good idea, because how long would that last? Luckily, I have an original YD100 top. This is the one I actually had on this case the very first time when I built it, but I thought that I did something wrong in here, because if you look in here, I don't know if you'll be able to see, it's not that bad, but there's pitting all up at the top because I didn't realize it at the time. But it had nothing to do with my grinding. I was so new to grinding, I didn't realize what the real factor was. And the real factor ended up being the crank bearing blew apart. This was making some steam. And I just actually looked at the numbers, and they were, I didn't realize, I grinded because I grinded, and I had very minimal knowledge of what I was doing, but why I did things. And it shows in the numbers because I went very aggressive. And I knew I was going aggressive because I wanted to make a lot of power. And when I put this on the bike and I took it around the block twice, it was a monster silliness. And then it blew the bearing out. And I thought it was, I had the squish wrong. I thought I did this wrong. I thought I did that wrong. And it turns out it was just the crank was shot. So I want to put this on this case, but the problem is that's making a lot of power, and this motor has a lot of miles on it. And to be honest with you, the crank I don't trust. Oh, what I'm doing here, or you should by now know what I'm doing here. Basically, I found a shiny little rabbit with a cute little bunny's tail, and I just chased right after that tail, right down that hole, and me and him are about 100 foot in the ground right now, and I'm still chasing him. He's a quick little guy, but I'm gonna get him. All that being said, basically what it means is, again, I am an idiot. So, obviously it was a year ago since I built the YD100 that I'm taking apart. So this motor, so we're all on the same page here. This motor has reliefs that I cut out for the transfers, which, let's be honest, are really bad, but you know, I know more now and I'm just better at it now, so whatever. We'll fix this, or just take a new piston more than likely and duplicate this whole thing. And the reason I'm going to duplicate for the most part is when I started this motor the very first time, I think I got two loops around the block, you know, two separate loops. One loop just down my street, made the right, and then went to go up the hill, and it was pulling crazy hard, and then all of a sudden click 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 click, and I just shut it down. And then I thought I fixed it. I didn't know it was the crank bearing at the time. I thought it was my port work and how close I had the cylinder to the piston, and it wasn't that. It was showing all signs of that, but it was actually the crank bearing was blowing apart, and that's why everything was coming loose. And I didn't know that until much later. Got discouraged, didn't even bother going back to it until I went to rebuild this YD100 that I put on tweakers. So all that being said, I only have literally one, if it's all put together, if you put every ride together, I have one ride from where I come out of my parking lot to the end of the street that was actually successful part of a ride. Now, that little bit of the successful part of the ride, this thing was absolutely a little monster, and it blew me away because it was the first time I ever made real crazy power with a degree wheel. And I actually, you know, I went and I shot for these numbers after doing some research and just things that I learned from the other motors that I built after remeasuring those motors with the degree wheel. And I just went to town with actually doing something with a cause. And that's what I did. And this thing was a monster. And I think because I was using old crank bearings is why it blew the crank apart so quick. So because this has the cutouts for the transfers, because I don't like digging out the transfers too much, especially on the YD100, because it's so hard to get to the transfers because of, you know, being a single piece cylinder. Now I have a lot of work to do to this crank because this crank is, well, one, very untrue. And the first thing I was coming up with is I couldn't get this to close. They were spread far apart. I didn't have one of the case bearings seated properly, which kind of stinks, but easily fixed. Just hit it with a sledgehammer really hard. So this crank I can't use without getting a new bearing in there. The bearing is, because I don't want to run into the same problem I had before. One, it's very grindy feeling in there, but more than that, when you look, the bearing, unless you put pressure on it, it doesn't move. So it's bound up inside of the connecting rod, probably from me beating on it. But now, I don't have a crank bearing on this side, but for this particular instance, we don't need a crank bearing. And actually, we don't even need the crank. So allow me to show you why I'm not using the original YD100 case. Do you see the lip right here? So you can see how much is there. Same with the front, obviously. Same amount of lip. So what does that mean? Well, that's pretty easy to say. When I built this motor, and this is what brought me into all this nutsy craziness of going back down this road, I'm not rebuilding a YD100 at this point. I am now building a completely different YD100, which honestly kind of makes me want to put the brakes on, because I'm not just simply rebuilding anymore, which, I mean, I technically still could, but the reason I don't want to is I would either have to then leave the squish at 2.2 times thicker than it should be, because with this particular motor, originally I went with a 0.6 squish, normally on 0.7 to 0.8. I was going 0.6 on this one. At one point I had it at 0.5, I don't remember, or something. It was like 5.5, but that's when I was running into the stuff hitting the head or the top of the cylinder, which wasn't due to the squish. It was because the bearing was breaking pieces off and chewing everything up. That's why I was running into issues with the clearance. I didn't know that at the time, and I don't want to say panicking, but I was frustrated, and that's why I just nipped it in the butt, because I sanded this down. You saw how much the difference is. So I brought it down a lot to get the squish where I wanted it, because I can't deck the bottom of the cylinder. I would love to be able to deck this part of the cylinder. I can't. I don't have the machinery to do it. Now, I am trying to think of a way to be able to do it, but that's still TBD. Since that's still TBD, I have no other choice but to deck the case, which is not a problem. I don't mind decking the case or anything, but you know, that becomes part of that motor. Like, you can only use them together or do a similar build with it. So that's why, because of the way the tolerances and clearances that I'm going for with this YD cylinder, I can't take the chance of using that case, because I don't want to deck that case down. This case is mostly stock. I know I did deck it just for, you know, sealing it reasons, so it's a perfectly flat surface, but only a few thousandths, not to the extreme that this is, to get the squish where I wanted it. And since I'm going to need YD100 cases to build my Franks, which are coming up hopefully soon, if everything keeps going down the road it's going, then I'll be able to use these cases for the Frank motors. Now, I don't know what I'm going to need for the Franks. I don't know if I'm going to need spacers. I don't know if I'm going to need to deck it. So I want to have a basically stock one so I can work off of that. Build Break Fix, he built a bunch of Franks. I don't watch his videos when it comes to those. I watch his other videos, but I don't watch his when he built the MS motors. I don't watch anybody that's building the motors except for Kevin. I watched him when he built the Husky, but he didn't really give out much information that I noticed like that. But also, he's building Huskies, not the steel motors. So I don't want to watch anything that has to do with the steel builds, because I want to have a clear mind when I go to do it, so I don't be like, well, he did it like this, maybe I could get away with doing it like that. I don't want any of that. I want to see what the problem is and work the problem out my way and go from there. Now, if I need help, maybe I'll ask a question here and there, but for the most part, it's going to be done my way, with my brain, my mindset, and how I think it should be done, not any ideals from anyone else. So it's just 100% mine. That's not to say his way's wrong or this one's wrong. It's just so that I know all the issues are worked out, how I can work them out, the tools that I have here, done the way I feel they should be done. Like, for instance, he built that 110 motor, and he used another motor to take the crank to make all this other stuff. That seemed really unnecessary to me when you could just port it. And his work's great from what it looks like in the videos, so I'm not knocking that. I just don't think it's feasible for like the average person to do, but it definitely worked for him, and he's making power with it. And I know mine, with just the decking and the clearancing and then the port work that I did to it, it's a monster and it works for me. So when I say that, it just means that there's many ways to skin a fish. You know what I'm saying? Skin a cat, scale a fish. You could do things different ways. You could do a job a different way than another person, but the end result will still be the same. And in our instance, making power and having fun. And that's all that matters. So I just want to make sure I get to making the power and having fun my way without any ideals from anyone else. So all that being said, I can't use that case. I need to use this case. So that's why I'm saying we're basically building a completely new YD100. We're not using anything from that, from Tweaker's original motor. So once again, that shiny little rabbit is really an elusive little beast. And he's just, what a monster this guy is. He's so cruel. Like, why does he do this to me? He just teases me with that little fluffy tail, like, come get me, Johnny. And then I go right after it like an idiot. Like right now, I could be finishing up the Minarelli. Oh, speaking of the Minarelli, this has nothing to do with it. So I was at work on break, and I had an epiphany. Like, it was such a mind-blowing moment for me that I almost forgot I was at work, because I jumped up in the break room and went to go take off, like I was about to just go do what I thought I just thought of to fix the 50. And I'll explain what that is, not in this video, obviously, but when we get back to the 50, eventually, maybe next year. I don't know, we'll see. So we're gonna have to figure out something with this case. Now I have some new connecting rod bearings and connecting rod coming. Now I have other ones, because I had 2 new cranks. I used one on Brian's, and the other one, I believe, is down there in what would be Anthony's old motor. But I'm not gonna use that yet, because I got these ones coming, and also I have other cranks in my box O nonsense. So the next step on this whole wheel of insanity is fixing the crank. That is the next thing I need to do. All right, so we're working on the motor still. Granted, it has been a couple days since I sat down and was able to get to it. What it basically comes down to is I lost it. Oh, so I want to use this case. Now, this case, when I originally did it, I ended up making a base gasket. This is the thickness of the base gasket, and this gives me about a 0.55, 0.6 squish. So to get that squish, we are 1.88, okay? To get a 0.5, 0.6 squish. Originally when I did this, I don't think I told you this, originally when I did this case, I sanded it down and I knew I had to take it down a lot. Well, you know, I do it by hand. Well, I wasn't paying close enough attention and I was putting much more force going forward than pulling back. And what that did is it took the case and made it lopsided. I was able to correct it by putting force the other way and then just squaring it up, but I had already gone so far. By the time I got it back level, I went down farther than I wanted, which isn't a huge deal. It was just I had to basically make a spacer. In this particular instance, the spacer was a bunch of gaskets. So with this case, this cylinder, I can run that gasket and have a perfect squish if I run this crank. This is an original YD100 crank. Problem is, this is the crank that I had in Tweaker's motor for many, many miles all summer. It's a good crank, not much vibration or anything. Problem is I could tell that the crank bearing is starting to go. One, it doesn't move anymore unless you like twist it. Also, there is a little bit of play up and down. So the fact that there's play up and down and that the bearing isn't moving freely enough tells me that the bearing is 100% shot. So I bought a new crank bearing. It was a connecting rod and wrist pin and the crank bearing. Really all I wanted was the crank bearing, but this is how I could find it, so that's what I bought. I was gonna just replace it and rebuild that crank, which, you know, I've done before. You've seen me do it, not a big deal. But then I started thinking I have an already assembled brand new crank in Bear's motor. Bear's motor, when I put that in, I don't think I actually ran it outside of just trying to get it to run. It was when I did the iron sleeve on there, and it never ran, like actually rode. Like it ran, but it never actually rode it anywhere, so it doesn't have any miles on it. It has just idle time or rev time, a little bit of riding time, like just around the corner, around the parking lot, trying to get it to tune out. So with that being said, that's a brand new crank, so I could put that in here. The problem with that is that an AF80 is not the same as a YD100. I'm not going to pretend to know all the numbers and what they mean. Like the YD100, I believe a real YD100 is supposed to be a 39.5 millimeter stroke. Then the AF80, I believe, is I think a 39 millimeter stroke. And then there's the ZL M80 or something like that. That's a 40 millimeter stroke, or somewhere along, whatever. What I'm getting at is I measured that one, how big it is, how tall it is, because I already know the case is shorter than it needs to be, and this is how thick I need the gasket to be to get the squish proper. But if I can get a shorter crank in there, then we're not talking a lot, a millimeter. If I could get a little bit shorter crank in there, then I could not use this gasket because I really don't want to reuse that gasket, and I could do a thin spacer out of a couple cans, which I went down and got the cans out of the dumpster the other day, or you know, recyclable bin, and I could do something like I did to Brian's motor, which I think would be great, because then I have a much sturdier base gasket and something I would feel much more reliable with, and then I can get my squish I need. So we're gonna run with this brand new crank, the AF80, which is brandy new. We're gonna run with that. All right, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. As always, I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do to get into this one. Not really sure where I left off, to be honest with you. But what I do know is we're gonna jump right in. So if you could, jump in with me. So what we're working on is the YD100. All right, guys, so I'm on break real quick and I'm doing a little editing, and I wanted to jump in and tell you really quick. So in between the footage you saw where I was sitting at my desk and the new footage you're seeing right now, obviously I was at my desk, and now I'm sitting at my desk again, but in a completely different area. I moved. Heather and I are back together. I don't know if she'll be on the channel, maybe in the background.
Anything else, I'm not sure yet. You'll definitely see the kids in all the videos coming up because they are running around like little nuts, and it's just great to have them. Nonetheless, in between moving from my old place to the new place, a lot of stuff got misplaced and lost, and that includes the footage. So you're seeing that I'm gonna jump right in and say, I don't know where we left off. Here's the motor all glued together. Well, I don't know where the footage is from recopying the old piston to basically installing everything and putting the new crank in and whatnot. I do break it down a little bit in the upcoming footage, but the basic gist of it, so I can actually catch you up properly because I don't have the footage to actually show you, is I took Tweaker's old motor piston out and I just used that piston and copied everything onto that piston from the original piston you saw all chewed up, so I could have the proper ramping to get the right durations for the transfers. The numbers I don't have off the top of my head, but I knew this motor is not going to last that long because I don't even think I showed you properly, but in the transfers, this is way back when I first started getting into the grinding and trying to do stuff proper. The control of the tool was still very hard for me, and the transfer on the intake and the transfer on the exhaust side, it scooted away from me, and because of the rotation of the rotary tool in the one corner, if you catch it just wrong, it will just go scat right down the side of the wall, and I did that a couple times in it. So I know this cylinder is not going to last that long. So to catch you up, I basically just used brand new rings because the cylinder itself was basically brand new. Like I said, I only had maybe 2 laps around my old block. That wasn't even under power. Maybe half of a lap was actually under power. So it was a brand new cylinder that I just kind of ruined with the poor tool control. And I made the aluminum spacer gasket out of a bunch of beer cans. I explained that too, you'll see. I used a new crank. I do explain it a little more, but I basically used, I think it was an AF80, so a completely brand new crank. But the problem with that was, and I don't think I get into it, it's in the footage I lost, is the actual shaft on the side for the stator, for the coil, is shorter than the YD100. So where the seal seals against that part of the crank, it's actually recessed in farther. So I had to build out with small washers that I had to cut down to get the proper spacing out so the magnet wouldn't ride against the case and whatnot. But it all worked out, obviously, because it was running like a champ, and that should pretty much get you up. Now, I say all the, you know, where we finished was with the port work being all done. The port work was done literally 2 years ago when I first started doing this. So if you guys remember, I showed you in the beginning of the video, this is 2 years in the making for this motor, and it was about a year ago that the original part of rebuilding this started again, but then I stopped because just life gets in the way with everything. So I hope this brings you up to snuff on what's going on, but all right, let's hop back into the video, guys. And I hope you guys are enjoying that art. That's all custom art that I'm putting up with the rabbit and me chasing it, or it chasing me. And let me know what you think about all that. That's all completely custom. If you like it all, drop me a like. And if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. It's totally free and it definitely helps me out. We're really close to 2,000 subscribers. I can't believe it. For 2,000 subs, I'd really like to do something special, and I have something special planned in my head, not on paper. But we'll work on that. All right, let's get back into it, guys. So I'm not sure if I'm able to put this in with the original video or how it's going and whatnot, but where we left off with this is very simple. We left off with all the port work is done. We have it sealed to the case. You can see the runs. I didn't even clean it up yet. So this is the Moto seal. There was a lot oozing out because I can't remember. It's been so long. I think it was something like 8 or 10 layers of metal. This is an old beer can. I think they're maybe 20 ounces, 40 ounces, I don't know. They were big beer cans. So I cut the beer cans up, cut out the sheets, basically the sides of it, and then I sanded it down to get all the paint and the plastic off that's coated on the inside. And I made spacers, and I had to stack them to get the right amount of spacing to make it work, because this case was a little fugazi compared to a normal stock case because I had already sanded this case down so far. So either way, we are now back to getting to work on this because it's been ever. Had a lot going on, did a little bit of moving, did a little bit of this, did a little bit of that, did a little bit of that guy's motor, this guy's build, that guy's thing. So we have some moments to get on this. So really, guys, all I have to do is finish building it. We are 100% sealed to the deck. piston rings are on. Everything is great for the motor, compression, and all that jazz. We do have to clean up the moto seal. If you remember, we had to put well, we didn't have to. I put a new crank in here because I had it and I wasn't interested in waiting. Can you please get out of here with that? That's loud. Just for a couple minutes. I have like another minute of recording. Please, go to mommy's.
Come here, Don.
Please, please, I'm begging you.
Come here.
Please, I'm begging you. Please. Thank you. I don't know where I was. Oh, so I put the crank in because I had it here. It was brand new. And the crank, I don't know if you can tell, see how it recesses in? I don't mind where the seal is. That also went in a little farther than it's supposed to, but we'll figure that out in a minute. Basically what it comes down to is I need to put a little bit of spacers here, meaning like a washer or something, just to get the magnet out so it doesn't rub on the case. All we gotta do is put the coil in, put the magnets on, and put the clutch in. And you can see the clutch isn't in right now, and that's a problem. Why is this a problem? Because you can't go anywhere if you don't have a way to get there. The basic end of it is we need to put the clutch in, and that's what I was working on now.